This is to ask the Minister whether DPER has plans to ensure that the Office of Government Procurement revises its tendering processes to allow for the purchase of carbon-neutral products for use within state organisations and buildings and for use by organisations funded by the state. The absence of guidelines means that although the state is probably the biggest purchaser in the state of materials and projects and so on, we have no guidelines in relation to carbon neutrality.
Minister, what I'm going to take
Here, look, apologies for being a bit delayed. I was opening a conference. So the government supports the move towards more green public procurement, and we recognise that the public service must demonstrate its commitment to sustainable development and use its influence to persuade others of the changes required to reduce our impact collectively on the environment. Work to promote the incorporation of social and environmental considerations in public procurement is being progressed by the Office of Government Procurement under the National Public Procurement Policy Framework, which is the overarching policy framework for procurement in Ireland. Under this framework, proposals to implement environmental considerations in public procurement are being developed through the cross-departmental social considerations advisory group chaired by the Office of Government Procurement. Minister Donoghue and I have been in discussions with our colleague, the Minister for Communications, Climate Action and Environment in relation to green public procurement in the context of our Climate Action Plan. We have agreed that the incorporation of green criteria into public procurement will be done in a structured manner with progressive implementation focusing on areas which have the greatest impact. In regard to the Office of Government Procurement, in cooperation with the Department of Climate Action and Communications, it is currently developing a circular for government departments and offices on promoting the use of environmental and social considerations in public procurement. The circular will direct departments and offices to consider including environmental criteria in their procurements where such clearly defined and quantifiable, verifiable and measurable criteria have been developed by the Department of Climate Action. An overarching objective of all public procurement is the achievement of value for money. In implementing environmental considerations in public procurement, it is crucial that an approach is adopted that will further our policy while also ensuring a competitive marketplace where suppliers can compete aggressively, resulting in the desired pricing outcome. In areas where the market is not yet sufficiently competitive, a phased approach to environmental consideration in public procurement may be necessary to ensure the emergence of new suppliers with innovative solutions. Care should also be taken to ensure that the addition of environmental considerations to public contracts is done in a manner that does not mitigate against small and medium-sized enterprises, as they may not be in a position to bear the additional costs or administrative burdens.
Minister, Deputy, 1 minute.
Thank you. I think you'll acknowledge yourselves that's largely a repeat of a previous answer given by Minister Donoghue. So what I want to ask you, Minister, is since the same answer by Minister Donoghue some time ago, has anything actually happened? The government has gone on a bus to Grange Gorman and it has launched another long document with 200 headings. This is all about process. Can I give you some examples? Is there a cost-benefit analysis on a carbon basis available, for instance, in relation to the Bus Connects project, where there are changes proposed to the bus services in Dublin, some of which are very acceptable to people, others of which are not. But it also involves the destruction of huge numbers of trees, which clean the air, and it also involves significant losses potentially of gardens in certain areas where hedging is the most effective resource in terms of reducing asthma in children. So can I ask you, this is a repeat of your previous answer, well, Minister Donoghue's previous answer on this. Can I ask you, can you identify and give us some examples of actual progress you're making?
Okay, Minister.
Actually, Deputy, because the whole concept of social considerations, where environmental considerations are a part of, were initiated by our department some time ago, ever before I suppose the recent discussion was ramped up into the area of the climate change agenda with the publication of the action plan for climate change. Because indeed, I suppose on foot of a visit to my own office by a former member of the Oireachtas, Kathleen O'Mara, from your own party, who's heading up rehab, the whole concept of social considerations, which is contained in the EU directive, was something that I wanted to try and advance more, particularly in the area of people with disabilities. And it's in that context that we established a working group with the Departments of Health, Justice and our own department. And we've moved on now to a working group similarly to the Departments of Climate Change and Environment. But the development of policy in this area, we have to be very mindful, as I said, Cathaoirleach, because all of the areas of, I suppose, interaction that I get from deputies of all sides of the House here in relation to procurement policy invariably comes back to the protection of the SME sector, for instance, and as well as that efficiency, and as well as that value for money. And it is something that in the context of the directive we have to be mindful of. But we are working through this, Cathaoirleach. It is something that we take very seriously. And in relation to the specific issue, Deputy, that you raised, and I know it's a
have another further minute. Deputy?
Yeah, I'm actually trying to open a conversation with the Minister that we can have a discussion on what are the examples. For instance, the government is now ordering 6 vehicles which will take some account of carbon. But we've no other concrete example except that those 6 vehicles will possibly be followed in the next couple of years by 600. If you go into the canteen here in Leinster House, Minister, when you go in to have your cup of coffee or tea, will you have a look and see where the green bins are, which allow people to recycle their waste in the canteen? Like, we can start with very small examples that will actually help people to change. You'll be familiar with the fact that over the last 10 to 20 years, a lot of lighting systems have been changed so that when people leave a room, the lights go off in a lot of public buildings. That's the kind of examples I'm looking for. And I mean, I can appreciate from your answer the discussions are only starting. I was in a community centre last night with a couple of hundred people because it's threatened with closure in Hartstown in my own constituency. And the lights that are in the ceiling are deemed by everybody to be the most polluting kind of public lighting. Now, can you just give us some concrete examples of what the government is proposing, please?
Minister, thank you.
Just in relation to the last point, in relation to public lighting, we are making huge strides across the country, and all deputies will have seen it, for instance, in the replacement of public lighting on streets. They're now being done by LEDs, which are far more efficient, and they're cropping up all over the country. But in relation to the specific elements that you raised in the first element, I can't comment because I don't know the details in relation to the hedges that you were referring to. But in relation to, we have to be very careful that we don't provide a situation, and I think the Deputy would understand and appreciate this from her time in government as well, that we don't give a monopoly type situation an unfair advantage in relation to procurement. I think that would be very unfair. But as well as that, in relation to the transport element, we are purchasing buses, as the Deputy refers to, off an existing framework which has to be concluded, and the framework has to finish itself out, and when that framework is concluded we can move on to a new one. But we are, for instance, as well, and the Deputy will know this, committed, for instance, and has already been the case, of the procurement of rail carriages by Irish Rail. So we are moving to a new agenda, and in relation to the social considerations, just to get back to it, we are doing a lot of work in this area, and I suppose I've written to all spokespersons in relation to the opposition, government ministers and otherwise. I want to hear examples, and I welcome the opportunity to have that dialogue, but I've written to opposition spokespersons to get examples of how we can continue the procurement reform agenda within the context of the EU directive, and certainly, Deputy, I would look forward to any type of engagement that can be held.
Thank you, Deputy. Next.